Please take your seats. We'll get going. All right, everyone, thank you. Good afternoon, delegates. Good afternoon, friends. I hope you had a good lunch break. I had a sandwich. It was fine. This afternoon is going to be. So, thank you very much for the good work this morning. The mood was good. The suggestions were very good. You were sharp, excellent ideas. All we need to do is pick up the pace. So we will work a little bit faster just to make sure that we cover the material, but we certainly won't rush. We will work methodically, but we will work a little bit quicker. Thank you very much. I think it's very straightforward. We will just carry on exactly where we got to. So we just ended the conversation in paragraph 3. So we're going to move to paragraph 4. This is a paragraph with 4, it has a chapeau sentence and it has 4 sub-paragraphs. I think we've spent quite a bit of time discussing the sub-paragraphs, the ideas in them. So I hope that they are familiar to you and they are relatively clear. I hope that we'll be able to agree them fairly quickly. There's obviously a verb at the end of the chapeau. I don't think we need to spend, let's continue the rule that says we won't spend too long on different variants of the verb. We will solve that in a different way. But I welcome, please, interventions on any of the parts of paragraph 4, so the chapeau, or any of the 4 sub-paragraphs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kocha. With regard to point C, we propose to strike where possible. And the reason behind that is that if you are depositing some sequence, you should already know where you have brought it. Otherwise, maybe you have stole it. And we propose a new D bis, which reads as follows, and this is not a new idea, but we have reflected in our submission. So, ensure that any new submission of DSI will only be accepted when accompanied by verifiable document indicating permission for publication from the national authorities of the country of origin of the genetic material from which the DSI is derived. Thank you.
Egypt, that's very clear. So a request to strike through where possible in paragraph C, and then the text that I think you submitted in writing yesterday or the day before as a new D bis. That's very helpful. Thank you, Egypt. So reactions on that or any of the other parts of the paragraph? I see the EU, European Union.
Yes, and good afternoon to all. Yes, I also had a delicious sandwich, and I think given that it's very hot outside, it's actually quite pleasant to be in here, be protected from the annoying sun that there is. Para 4, a few tweaks from our side to make it better. I think that since the Conference of the Parties has no authority over the database operators, we actually would prefer to start the paragraph with entities operating public databases on DSI are invited to instead of should. In A, the second part of the paragraph is actually a duplication because the information about the requirements is actually the essential information about the multilateral mechanism, so we would actually suggest to stop paragraph 8 after available to those accessing their databases. On B, we actually are not sure what is meant here and what we are asking. But in any case, since in principle we have another paragraph that actually clarifies that national legislation should be supportive to the multilateral mechanism and there should not be any double obligations. We think this is probably not the right way to do it. I think that what we could work with is an alternative wording of that one, and that would mean that we would change the last part of the sentence from with respect to digital sequence information with respect to genetic resources. Paragraph C, I think that from our point of view, we have a question about the issue related to traditional knowledge associated with those genetic resources. I think that what we have heard in all the discussion is that the IPLC tagging is still in an infant stage and is considered as being very challenging and difficult by databases. So we would, for now, sort of put the reference to TK associated with genetic resources in brackets, because I think we need to think about a little more how that would be practically possible in that regard. Subparagraph D, I think what is missing in there is the recognition that databases are actually providing open access to DSI to a wide variety of stakeholders. And I think that it bears to sort of highlight that. So in our view, we would actually prefer to say, start deeply saying, when providing open access to DSI, take into account in their operations, and then the text that we have in this one. We have to study DBIS further as suggested by Egypt. For the sake of time, put that into brackets and we'll see what we do with it eventually. And I think that concludes our comments on para 4. Thank you.
European Union, that's very helpful. I invite comments or reflections on all of that from the next speakers, who are Australia, Japan, and Canada. Australia, you have the floor.
We would like to retain where possible in paragraph 4C. So if you just want to pop that in brackets, that would be lovely. And we too would also have to bracket the addition by Egypt on verifiable documents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia. Bonus marks for concision. Japan, Canada, and Peru. Japan.
Our comment for paragraph 4, we have submitted our proposal yesterday. That is, at the very beginning of paragraph 4, we suggest the following to be added. Database and academic institutions are not expected to make monetary contribution to the global fund. So that is on the very beginning of paragraph 4. We think this paragraph is talking about large public databases, so that must be the intention of this paragraph. For this reason, we also propose to add large before public databases, because we believe that is the intention of this paragraph. And because new databases run by research communities will not be able to fulfill all these requirements, this is too heavy for them, they will give up creating databases in the end. That is why we are proposing this. And we also think COP decisions can instruct parties to do something, but COP decisions we do not think can instruct entities to do something. For this reason, we also propose the addition of as appropriate after DSI, and the strikeout should. So we propose not strikeout should. You should add as appropriate, because they can do so if it is appropriate. This is not an obligation. So this is comment for overall paragraph 4. And we have comment on item B. As EU pointed out, we are also not quite sure this is what this is about. This is about multilateral mechanism. I don't think we can talk about national obligations. Database operators are not supposed to keep an eye on all countries' national legislation. So this item B, we propose this item B to be deleted. On item C, talking about traditional knowledge, we are not also quite sure about this part, because the article report in 2020, that's CBD/DSI, Article 2020, 1/7, Annex 1, Paragraph 9, Table 1, actually clearly talking about traditional knowledge has nothing to do with DSI. For this reason, we propose the deletion of the mentioning about traditional knowledge from item C. Then Egyptian proposal of DBIS, we are also not quite sure, because it may be a too much burden for database operators. So Egyptian proposal should be further considered. Thank you.
Thank you. So a suggestion there from Japan to insert a new sentence at the beginning of paragraph 4. Databases and academic institutions are not expected to make monetary contributions to the fund. I welcome reflections on that. And a number of other suggestions, including a suggestion to delete paragraph B. Thank you very much. Let's hear from Canada, Peru, and Côte d'Ivoire.
Chair, glad you had a good sandwich. I had pasta. We'll see how long that keeps me going. We agree with the EU's point about inviting databases, as the COP has no authority over those databases. Regarding Japan's proposal about monetary benefit sharing from expectations, we see no concern with that. That seems to add some clarity, so we're fine with that. On paragraph 4C, regarding TK associated with genetic resources, we think it might be more pragmatic to use wording such as biocultural metadata indicating the use of TK. So we think that might provide that practical side that maybe the EU is looking for. So how to highlight those instances when there may be TK associated with the genetic resources or indigenous interest in those genetic resources. On 4D, in regard to how the particular UNESCO document was drafted, we think it's very important to have that reference to the open science recommendation in there. But we could, for precision, refer to the guidance set out in Section 3 of that recommendation, because that's where the actual recommendations are within the recommendation. Finally, at this point, we would not be comfortable with the Egyptian proposal for 4D BIS. As other colleagues have pointed out, we think it's very difficult to see how databases could be expected to fulfill that role of policing what goes in. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. Okay. Eye on the time. So I think in terms of the verb at the end of paragraph 4, I think it's clear that we have a disagreement there, so we will reflect that in the text. I don't think we need to we don't need to spend any more time on that now. I think we've heard already split views, I think, on the proposal on DBIS, so we will reflect that in square brackets in the text. Let's move on. Peru, Cote d'Ivoire, Argentina. Peru, you have the floor.
Ayer escuchamos por parte de los investigadores que ellos, cuando depositan una secuencia, también incluyen información del país de origen. ¿Por qué? Porque las secuencias digitales se obtienen de un recurso genético, no aparecen de la nada. Entonces, para acceder a ese recurso genético, han tenido que cumplir con las regulaciones de los países de origen del recurso genético, muchos de ellos que han ratificado el protocolo de Nagoya. Por eso que para nosotros es importante garantizar que la secuencia que se deposite viene de un acceso legal del recurso genético del cual se obtiene esa secuencia. Y un poco alineándonos a lo declarado, también apoyamos lo declarado por Egipto, nos gustaría también, de repente como una alternativa, proponer una pequeña incorporación en el párrafo 4C de la siguiente manera. Require, where possible, the provision of information on the country of origin, the new text, and the legal access continue of the genetic resources from which DSA was derived. All of text remain. Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Peru. So that's an insert which has, I think, the intention of requiring the database, because that's who's referred to in paragraph 4, to require of the uploader the provision of information on the legal access. Okay, thank you very much. So Cote d'Ivoire, Argentina, and Uganda.
Le point A. C'est écrit mettre à la disposition des personnes. Et je me suis dit, les bases de données sont accédées aussi bien par des personnes, mais il y a également personnes morales et personnes physiques. On a, depuis tout le temps dans le test, on utilise le mot utilisateur et là, on change de terme, on met personne. Est-ce que ce ne serait pas bon qu'on garde le même mot? Ça, c'est la première chose. La deuxième chose, c'est que je soutiens la proposition BBIS faite par l'Égypte et également j'adhère à la proposition faite par le dernier intervenant qui va également dans le sens de la proposition de l'Égypte, si on peut trouver un accord. Merci.
Very much, Cote d'Ivoire. Let's hear from Argentina, Uganda, and the United Kingdom. Argentina.
Very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for carrying us all together through the text. I think both of you are doing a great job in trying to get all the views into the paper in an organized and structured way. I won't refer to the chapeau because I think you already captured correctly what we wanted to see there as different options. I will refer to 4B, In our view, the insertion by the EU on genetic resources there is appropriate, so we would support to have genetic resources mentioned there, but we're unsure at this stage if we should delete digital sequence information, so maybe we should have genetic resources and or digital sequence information. I will also refer to the insertion by Egypt, which in our view is similar also to the edits that Peru was making. We were actually about to introduce similar changes, but in another paragraph. So it wouldn't be D, B's, no C, it was in B. That's where we saw it. But I will leave you to reflect somewhere in the text this idea that some requirement were applicable of the provision of proof that in the case of a material access, that was in conformity with national regulation to ABS should be present in the text as one of the options that parties would like to discuss at COP. And finally, on C, I think that the proposal by Canada on biocultural metadata might be useful, so that's something that we would like to see. Thanks.
Excellent, and thank you for your flexibility with respect to the wording in D bis and the suggestion from Peru. I think that's right. I think we will present to you tomorrow overnight. We will present to you a version that we hope sort of brings those things together. Next, we'll hear from Uganda, United Kingdom, and Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair. First, we would like to reflect on the proposal by Egypt and note that this is a very useful proposal, and therefore we strongly support the proposal. With respect to 4A, we note that the language at the end of the sentence, starting from including the requirements for users of DSI, is almost similar to what is contained in B, and perhaps we would transfer the intention of that last part of the sentence to be covered in B. And then we would also like to lend our support to provision of information on the country of origin, because it's good scientific practice to collect genetic resources with metadata. Therefore, I think databases would also be interested to know where the genetic resources come from. And this can solve many, many other things. So we feel that C is a very, very important proposal, and we don't have any problem with the biocultural insertion that was proposed. Thank you, Chair.
Uganda. Let's hear from the United Kingdom and then Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. And thank you to all colleagues for their suggestions so far. We can support the suggestions made by the EU on throughout paragraph 4. On A specifically, we do think that databases can have a helpful role in raising awareness of benefit sharing issues and also pointing users towards the appropriate information. We do think, however, that A and B have some kind of repetition between them and are addressing similar issues. So I think perhaps there's an opportunity to try and streamline A and B a little bit more and perhaps merge them. On paragraph C, we would like to keep the reference to where possible. I think that's already been captured. But we do recognise the importance of country of origin information for the purposes of scientific best practice. And on paragraph D and Egypt's proposal and the discussion around making sure that data submitted is in line with national legislation has been acquired legally. I think that many databases, if not all of the public databases, do have provisions in their terms of use that users of those databases should be in compliance with relevant national and international legislation. And perhaps we can consider what those clauses look like and whether that addresses the concerns that are being raised. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, UK. I can see that we're nearly ready to move on, I think, and I can summarise where we've got to. Let me hear from Zimbabwe and then the Republic of Korea, and then I'll sum up a little. Zimbabwe, you have the floor.
Mr. Co-Chair, I want to respond to insertions made by Japan. I want to object to those additions for the following reasons. So the addition of the words, well, the addition of that first paragraph about or that section about databases and academic institutions not having to make monetary benefits that's not acceptable. Why? Because we already do have, in this lifetime, many multi-million-dollar companies that have been born out of academic institutions. And so if we just simply blanket that academic institutions don't have to make monetary benefits, that means we will see a lot of companies being run in academic institutions to avoid that. So no, I think we already made provisions before to say if you obtain monetary benefits from the use of DSI, then you should share monetary benefits. And that, I think, takes care of if an academic institution is not making monetary benefits, they are therefore not required to pay monetary benefits. But if they are making monetary benefits, then they should share those. So we object to that. And then the idea that only large databases are eligible here is also unacceptable for many reasons. One of them being large is very subjective. What is large? How large is large? Who decides what large is? So no, all databases, irrespective of how big they are or how small they are, should be able to comply with this, especially when we look at how difficult could it be to make information about the multilateral mechanism available to those accessing your database. So if you can build a database that other people can access, surely you can put somewhere in a little corner there a little button that they can then open the multilateral mechanism. So we don't see the justification in this exclusion at all. Thank you.
Zimbabwe. So we have a few more requesting to take the floor. I'm keen to hear if they'll indulge me a response from Japan, I think, to Zimbabwe's suggestion on the first sentence. I think there's an interesting suggestion there that some of the requirements that we've discussed this morning in paragraphs 1 and 2 already lay out, in essence, who is in scope or out of scope. So that's an interesting reflection, I think. So we have a new sentence there at the start of 4. We have, that's in square brackets, but we might come back to that in a moment. We've obviously got some choices around the verbs. We've got some suggestions on A and B, potential streamlining, genetic resources and or DSI, a suggestion there. Then we've got some references perhaps to biocultural in paragraph C, and we're having a conversation about the sort of the proof of legality of sourcing. I think that's a good summary of where we're at. I think if you have, just in the interest of time, if you have new ideas you'd like to introduce or ways of streamlining the text, let us know. But otherwise, I think that's a good summary of where we're at, and we should try to move on. Let me hear from the Republic of Korea and Switzerland.
Co-chair, regarding paragraph 4C, Korea agrees with the points raised by Japan. Korea considers it not appropriate to include traditional knowledge, as there is a weak linkage between traditional knowledge and data on genetic resources in the context of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Republic of Korea. Switzerland and Egypt, with, I hope, new ideas or suggestions. Let's not take the floor again to support other positions. I think they're well reflected now in our text. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. So I will restrict my comments only on a new point which has not been raised before. This is in paragraph A, where we have the word requirements. And here again, we have the issue that we don't have any legal obligations for users, and so we would like to replace this word requirements by possibilities and procedures, because I think this is what actually is helpful for the users if they know what they can and what they can do and how they can do the benefit sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. I'll hear from Egypt and then Brazil.
Sure, it's always good to support people, but not on that, because some flexibility have been showing on the issue of legality, but whatever the text that is, two things have to be included. One, that you have gained access to the resource it's in a legal way, and the other issue is that you have been authorized to put the sequence on the database, and those two things are not the same. Because I might give you a permit to even to sequence that genetic resource, but I didn't approve you to put it in a public database. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Egypt, for that clarification. We will hear from Brazil, Norway, and then NGO 1145. Brazil.
I'll make a brief comment on paragraph C. On paragraph 4C, we do take note of the proposal to replace, if I'm not mistaken, associated traditional knowledge with biocultural label or similar biocultural data. We are interested in hearing more about these concepts. We have been discussing that, but so far we believe there are no agreed definition on what this should be. Our preference would be to be as general as possible, and associated traditional knowledge is already a very well-established term in this discussion and in the convention, the Nagoya Protocol, and other instruments. So we think it's general enough and very wide-ranging. We are not saying that biocultural data or labels or associated concepts may not be useful, but in this particular context, which we think it's like sets up like the general landscape for the discussion, maybe will be more appropriate to be more general. And then some further on, if we need to give further detail on how this could be done, maybe we could mention instruments like biocultural labels and so on. But since this is a general statement, our preference would be to maintain a general reference to associated traditional knowledge. We're not getting to details in hearing how this should be done, but we definitely think this element should be there. We have gained a lot of ground in making all parties have understood the growing importance of the provision of information on the country of origin. We have advanced a lot in this regard, and the public databases also have advanced a lot in this regard. I think the time has now come for us to advance in another area which deserves our attention, which is give due attention to the associated traditional knowledge in this discussion. So we strongly believe that there should be a mention. We are flexible in language, of course, but we do believe that this is something that should be in our instrument. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Let me hear from Norway. Norway, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, I'm just checking something. Could you please skip me and allow me to come back?
So I said I would go to, I've had other parties request the floor, which is good, but I am going to go to the NGO I promised. So that's NGO 1145, please.
Thank you, Co-Chair. We have a couple of comments on the clauses, but before that, allow me to introduce a 4 bis, a short one, which is very much interconnected with para 4 and request party support for this. The language is as follows. Parties funding, sponsoring, and or hosting sequence databases shall ensure such databases will take effective measures, for effective implementation of this decision and other relevant future decisions by the conference of parties. I request party support for this.
And could you repeat it for us one more time, please, the World Network? Mike 1145.
Parties funding, sponsoring, and or hosting sequence databases shall ensure such databases will take measures for effective implementation of this decision and other relevant future decisions by the conference of parties. I have a couple of more comments on paragraph 4, but first may I request support for this language.
You do tell us your other comments on paragraph 4, and we'll come back to support, don't worry.
Because maybe I don't want to confuse the parties to which one of the suggestions have been supported. Okay. Can I? With regard to paragraph, actually with regard to the changes suggested by EU, UK, Egypt, we welcome many of those suggestions. Especially we understand the concerns which EU has made, like when we cannot have a decision on databases outside the framework and they are invited to, we understand the legality behind it. We believe this is fine when we look into the proposals coming from Egypt to have an additional database within CBD. So then it will match. If it is matched with that proposal, definitely we think we can live with the language which was proposed by EU. And there was a question related made by the UK regarding that there is already an existing terms and conditions which relating to the compliance with existing national laws, etc., in the terms and conditions. Wouldn't that be sufficing? The problem here is that many of the databases just put this as declaration, a kind of announcement of certain terms and conditions. Do not actively seek a kind of click-wrap agreement from the parties to read some of those terms and conditions and agree by it. There is no collection of user identity. So when someone is violating this law and putting it into the database, and someone else is actually downloading it from other place, by the time the countries who have understood their rights are violated and come to the trying to make some legal remedies, the data is already shared with multiple parties, and we don't have any records of who has actually accessed it or who have actually downloaded copies of the data is. So in that regard, we think paragraph B can be slightly modified, instead of saying inform the users of the requirement, we can say require the users to comply with applicable obligations. And in the end, we can say through user registrations and click-wrap agreements. Thank you, Co-Chair. Request party support for both the proposals under paragraph 4B as well as previous proposal on paragraph 4 base. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you. Networks. So we have two proposals. One is a proposal for BIS, which places effectively an obligation on parties that fund, sponsor, or host sequence databases. Is there any party support for that? Very good. And then there is a suggestion for a change to paragraph B, which is require users to conform, blah, 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 through user registration. Do I see any support? I do. Thank you very much. Next, I will bring in Norway, and then Togo, followed by Japan. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So we have a proposal for an addition in D. And it would read, starting with the following sentence, provide open access to DSI, comma, consistent with current international practice, comma, taking into consideration, and then we would delete apply, and then it would read as it did. I will repeat. So D, starting with, and the insertion goes as follows. Provide open access to DSI, comma, consistent with current international practice, comma, taking into consideration, comma, and then we would delete apply, and the rest of the paragraph would read as it did. Thank you.
Well understood. Togo, please, followed by Japan.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Nous soutenons les commentaires développés par le Brésil sur le 4C. Et nous voudrons aussi apporter quelques éclaircissements qui motivent notre soutien. Monsieur le Président, nous pensons que le 4C, en fait, il s'agit de s'assurer que les ressources génétiques, à partir desquelles le séquençage numérique a été obtenu, ont été obtenues de façon légale, de telle sorte que le mécanisme multilatéral ne favorise pas la biopiraterie. On le sait bien, les connaissances traditionnelles ne sont pas directement reliées à l'ICN. Ça, c'est bien clair. Mais les ressources génétiques à partir desquelles l'ICN a été développé, mais il y a les connaissances traditionnelles derrière. C'est de ça qu'on parle, de fournir des informations dans la mesure du possible. Et c'est un mot important. Si ce n'est pas possible, il n'y aura pas le déluge, si ce n'est pas possible. Mais quand c'est possible, c'est un idéal souhaité. C'est une situation idéale souhaitée. Donc nous pensons que ce 4C est important. Et nous avons un peu comme l'impression que tout ce qui a un peu trait au troisième objectif de la Convention, on ne veut pas en parler. Et je l'ai dit hier qu'un mandat a été donné à ce groupe pour ce qui concerne le protocole de Nagoya, je l'ai rappelé hier, qui a un rapport qui doit être fourni à la COP MOP 5. Si nous écartons tous les aspects qui sont en lien avec le troisième objectif, comment le président et les co-présidents, quel sera le contenu de ce rapport que vous aurez à présenter à la COP MOP 5 sur la décision NP 4 de la COP MOP 4 de 2022. Donc je crois bien que nous devons relever ces aspects, voir comment lever les ambiguïtés, parce qu'on ne peut pas parler qu'on veut atteindre, on veut que le fonds contribue à la réalisation des objectifs de la Convention, mais tout en ne cherchant pas à parler du troisième objectif de la Convention. Vous voyez, il y a un peu une ambiguïté là-bas. Donc si nous voulons que le fonds contribue aux objectifs de la Convention, pour nous, c'est les trois objectifs: la conservation, l'utilisation durable et le partage juste et équitable des avantages. Je crois bien que les co-présidents doivent relever cet aspect et voir comment il peut être traité afin que ça puisse édifier les parties à la 5e réunion des parties au protocole de Nagoya. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Togo. Let me hear, so our last speakers on this, and then we'll move on. I'd like to hear from Japan, the United Kingdom, and then IPLC 1159. Japan.
This is a reaction to the comment made by Zimbabwe. We attach great importance to the principle of open science, and we believe academic institutions are the basis for the open science. Actually, many academic institutions are already providing non-monetary benefits. So if we charge these academic institutions, it would affect the open science. That is our concern. And large database, that is very important for us because there are many various databases run by small communities, sometimes only 2 to 3 people. And are we going to request all these database operators to do all these requirements? That is too heavy on them. That is our concern too. That is the basis of our comment. Then on Egyptian proposal, we, as many parties suggested, we do not think that is realistic, asking government permission for the register of foreign DSI. Just considering the number of it and the time it requires, it would hinder the development of science and technology, which must be done speedily. Thank you.
That response. Let's hear from the UK and then IPLC 1159. UK.
Mr. Co-Chair, I can be very brief. It is regarding the proposal made by the Third World Network, which was supported by some parties in the room. We would like further time to consider this proposal, and in the meantime, we'd like to place it in brackets. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. We can do that. IPLC 1159.
Me again, academia, hiding behind my colleagues at the IPLC table here. So I wanted to comment on paragraph 4B and support the suggestions to exchange the word user for uploader or submitter, either way. And again, coming back to Egypt's proposal, I think it's always fun to think about real-time data, and we're very lucky within the DSI network to have all 3 of the INSDC heads in our network, as well as, of course, China's large DSI database. And they have told me that since our meeting began on Sunday, there have been roughly 62,000 new DNA sequences submitted to their databases. So that's around 1 sequence every 6 seconds, or maybe a dozen sequences since I started speaking. It's very hard to know how you would do national ABS compliance measures. It's just really not practical, and we have to be realistic here as much as there are ideals that we strive for. On the issue of user registration, I'd like to also pose just some provocative questions. I wonder what this data gets you. It gets you millions of user names. So my son, in his high school biology class, they use the INSDC because it's a great place to learn about biology. So are you going to keep track of high schoolers' names? And then the next question would be, what are you going to do with the data that these databases keeps? Are the databases keeping these registration names of individuals and going to hand them over to national authorities, or what is the point of collecting that kind of data? And then again, the scalability questions of tens of millions of users. You know, what is the library of information that we want to collect here? And then, of course, from a technological perspective, there is a ripple effect. So it's not only that the INSDC requires registration, because it has to also require registration of the databases that use the INSDC. So that's thousands of databases that have to then also begin registering their users and answering the questions that I raised previously. So it is indeed a good idea, as the UK suggested, to bracket that text for now, in my opinion.
Thank you very much, academia. I'm very keen to move on, but I do see that Egypt has raised their hand again. Egypt, can you be very brief?
Just very briefly. You can comply with what we are asking for by just very simple things. First one is that you include a space where the uploader can include the reference number of the application and the issuing department for the approval. And then he consents that he have obtained that legally. It's not very complicated. It can be done. Thank you.
Egypt for that point and for being brief. We appreciate that. Thank you, colleagues. That was a very good exchange. There was a lot of material. We worked very effectively. I shall hand over to my co-chair.
Thank you very much for the discussion so far. We'll move on to paragraph 5, which is a bit simpler, and hopefully will be done in a few minutes. We'll open the floor for comments on paragraph 5, but also, if no comments, as usual, you can just say, co-chairs, you have done a good job on this one. Let's move to the next one. So I see the EU has requested for the floor. EU.
Chair, and just an inquiry. It's slightly puzzling that we have a provision that said parties should take administrative policy and legislative measures consistent with national legislation. Since it's parties that do themselves, I think it will most likely be consistent with national legislation. So I'm wondering what the added value of that reference to national legislation here is, or whether it's a simple editing error to put it in there. Thank you.
You saw you're proposing deletion of this, yeah. All right, so I'll now have Chile also comment to the proposed deletion. If you see no value as well, you can say so, and then we'll have a much simpler paragraph. Chile and then Norway. Chile.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Y lamento no hacerle la vida más fácil y tener que hacer comentarios sobre este párrafo. En primer lugar, vemos un mérito en lo que ha planteado la Unión Europea, en el sentido de que efectivamente si una parte ha decidido tomar medidas legislativas, estas medidas se entiende que serán compatibles con su propia legislación. Y es un esfuerzo y un análisis que debe hacer la propia parte, pero es un supuesto que debemos asumir, ¿no? Por lo tanto, no vemos valor agregado en hacer esta referencia. Y apoyamos lo señalado por la Unión Europea. En relación al contexto o al contenido de este párrafo, en nuestra visión vemos un cierto retroceso respecto de lo que estaba señalado en la primera versión del documento, por dos razones. En primer lugar, las acciones que se piden a las partes en términos de las medidas para hacer posible que se canalicen las contribuciones, las vemos más suaves y menos claras que en la versión anterior. En ese sentido, proponemos una edición o un cambio en el texto y reemplazar las palabras, y voy a decirlo en inglés, en vez de usar to facilitate or require, is to ensure and require. Esa es una primera modificación que proponemos. Y el segundo elemento que vemos que está ausente y que refleja esta idea de que la actual redacción del párrafo es un retroceso respecto a la versión del documento anterior, es que no hay una referencia a las grandes empresas transnacionales, como estaba señalado en la versión anterior. Y ese es un elemento importante y crítico porque, como lo hemos reiterado, debemos enfocar nuestros esfuerzos en que esas empresas sean las principales contribuyentes a este fondo. En ese sentido, proponemos agregar al párrafo 5 la siguiente frase: to facilitate, to ensure and require contributions to the global fund, comma, in particular from large transnational companies, comma, in line with the modalities of the multilateral mechanism. Gracias.
Thank you, Chile, and also for proposing that we go back to the earlier version. So we'll consider also reflecting this again as proposed. But before we do that, I would like to hear other parties' views on the suggestions made by Chile, and also I think you have supported the deletion of national, according to consistent with the national legislation, and I hope to also hear more parties' reflections on this. I'll now give the floor to Norway and then Argentina.
Madam Co-Chair. So I agree with EU and Chile that we can delete consistent with national legislation with the reason provided by the EU, which I think is accurate. Second, I'm a bit hesitant to accept the addition by Chile to ensure. To me, that signals that the party would have to make a donation if the user do not fulfill the requirements. In effect, makes it to an ODA fund. That's my worry. So I'm a bit hesitant to use ensure, but I would like to hear how other parties reflect on that issue. Thank you.
I would welcome other parties to reflect on those points as well. I'll give the floor now to Argentina and then Cuba.
Madam Co-Chair. Regarding the reference to consistent with national legislation, Argentina has actually a different view. It was us, the ones that proposed it, and this comes from the legal review that we've done from this decision. And our understanding is that in order to implement what is being proposed, in different countries, it could take different kind of measures, and they fall under different competencies of governments or subnational governments, or sometimes different kind of bodies. So given that it entails different competencies, for us it's very clear that when we're going to say that you should take administrative policy or legislative measures, whatever you do has to be within the competencies that you have at the national level. So that's something that we need to clarify there. We also think that something that might not be clear in this paragraph is who you are requiring or facilitating, or if we go with Chile's proposal, eventually ensuring to contribute. So in our view here, we should have a reference after to facilitate or require contributions from their users. So it's a party requiring the users that are in its country eventually to contribute. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Argentina. So I think we are getting two proposals in terms of qualifying who should be requested to contribute. I think for Chile, we have to specify that we are talking about large and transnational companies. And from Argentina, we have to qualify that we are talking about the users of those countries. So I think we should reflect a bit on this, and maybe we can have one common way forward in terms of who we qualify in a simplified way. So I'll now give the floor to Cuba and then Switzerland.
Gracias, Copresidenta. Bueno, creo que las intervenciones de Chile y Argentina me alivian un poco, ¿no? Pero comenzando por lo del consistent with national legislation, nosotros teníamos la misma apreciación de que debe mantenerse por algo que hablábamos el día del grupo de contacto, que aquí hay que tener en cuenta legislaciones que tengan que ver con sistemas impositivos y una serie de normas que no necesariamente es el día a día de las autoridades ambientales, ¿no? Y como se trata de salidas y entradas de capital, hay que tener en cuenta las disposiciones que toman esos organismos en los países. Por eso yo creo que es válido mantener el consistent with national legislation, para poder hacer esa actividad. Creo que la solución estaba justamente en dar un poco más de explicación por qué estaba esa inclusión. Y definitivamente estamos totalmente de acuerdo con lo que dice Chile. A nosotros nos gustaría recuperar el párrafo de la primer non-paper, porque creo que es mejor base para la discusión que este nuevo que se está presentando. Por lo que se decía, hay palabras aquí que son claves, como que tienen que ver con la dimensión de la responsabilidad, que en esta nueva versión, como nosotros lo vemos, se diluye. Y yo creo que es correcto decir que hay que asegurar esa contribución, si no, el edificio nace hueco. Y yo creo que debe ser una responsabilidad que hay que asegurar en entidades específicas, que son como estas que estaban en la primera versión, Large and Transnational Company, y se redondea la idea. Esto tiene que ver con el párrafo 1, también, que habíamos estado hablando y que Colombia en su momento había hecho una propuesta. Quiero, para terminar, una cuestión formal, o sea, nosotros habíamos hecho una propuesta de modificación de este párrafo en la intervención en plenario cuando se hizo, y justamente no fue tomada en cuenta y ahora en la sala ha vuelto a salir prácticamente de forma similar a lo que habíamos propuesto, igual que otros países cuando se discutió en el plenario. Gracias.
Thank you, Cuba, and also for referring to paragraph 1, because I think what I would like the parties to also, as you reflect, is to also notice the interlinkages between the paragraphs, because we are building from paragraph 1 going towards the rest of the paragraphs. So we have already identified, for example, in paragraph 1 and 2, which users we are talking about. And in paragraph 5, we are saying what should parties do with what we have already agreed. So I would maybe urge you not to reflect everything we have already agreed in the other paragraphs, in the subsequent paragraphs, so that we can have a simpler approach and have smart paragraphs that we can work with. So I would urge you to reflect on that, and also always do look at the interlinkages between the paragraphs as they are responding to what we have already agreed. Thank you very much. I'll now give the floor to Switzerland and then UK.
We would like to amend the beginning of the sentence that it would read, parties are invited to take administrative policy or legislative measures, as we've already discussed before. And then I think one of the main elements that is still missing here in this paragraph is the incentivation. And so we would also make a change in the second line where it reads to facilitate or require contributions. Here we would build in the element of incentivation so that it would read to incentivize and facilitate contributions, and so on. I think this is really a very important element, and this is also, as you said, this paragraph is not in isolation, but it is linked to paragraph 7, where we then have more details on the incentives. And then regarding the consistent with national legislation, we do not really see the merit in this because anyway, any measures must be consistent with national legislation, and so in our view this can also be deleted. Thank you.
For your additions and also for noting the cross-linkages with paragraph 7. I'll now give the floor to UK and then EU. UK.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. We had similar reflections to Chile and Cuba with regard to reference to large and transnational companies that was previously in this paragraph 5. And that, just reflecting that earlier today, we did discuss a reference to companies with a turnover above X and its inclusion paragraph 1. I don't think there was agreement that that was perhaps an ideal formulation in paragraph 1, and we would support Chile's suggestion of bringing the reference to large and transnational companies back into paragraph 5. Thank you.
Thank you, UK, and I would also want the rest of the parties to respond on the new additions by Switzerland and Chile, as well as Argentina's proposals in this one. So I'll now move to EU and then Côte d'Ivoire. EU.
Chair, we continue to be puzzled by the need for parties to be reminded that they should be consistent with their own legislation. But if there are parties that need that reminding in a decision of the CBD, we will certainly not stand in the way of their need to be enlightened by the international community. I think that from our perspective, we actually cannot agree with the additions made by Chile. And we think that, in particular, the reference to large and transnational companies in those terms is too limiting because it actually seriously shrinks the range of companies that would actually be affected by this. And if this is the same direction that Chile wants to go with regard to the differentiation with regard to contributions, I think we would be a little bit worried from our side. We have no problem with adding a reference to incentivization in line with what Switzerland has said, but I think we are also happy with the two other elements, which means facilitate and require to remain, so maybe that could be an addition in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, EU. I think we are having the same issue with the verbs as we had in the previous paragraphs. So I think we'll take that as a point of divergence, and then I would expect that as parties, maybe we should not comment on that matter anymore because we obviously see that there will be some divergence. We'll be dealing with divergent verbs throughout our document. And also with the proposal by Chile, which I think EU has spoken on. I don't know if the proposal that was made by Argentina on the word of users would be a compromise suggestion to help us to move forward. You can reflect on that. Just trying to have at least something that we can agree upon. And I think there's the issue of consistent with national legislation, which I think I heard like some flexibility from the EU. They can confirm. And then we'll move forward with Côte d'Ivoire and then Togo. Côte d'Ivoire.
Je voudrais réagir sur le premier point, porte sur la législation nationale. Je m'étais interrogé pour savoir si le fait d'avoir mis avec leur législation nationale visait spécifiquement une législation, peut-être législation en matière d'accès et de partage des avantages, je ne sais pas. Mais si ce n'est pas le cas, je pense qu'on peut l'enlever. Deuxième chose, le Chili a proposé de mettre assuré au lieu de encourager ou exiger. Je pense que je n'adhère pas à cette proposition. Je préfère que ça reste encouragé ou exigé. Et je suis d'accord avec la proposition de l'Argentine quand on se réfère au chapeau de ce matin par rapport au 0 et au 1. On a utilisé utilisateur, on n'a pas catégorisé. Donc pour moi, il serait pertinent qu'on puisse justement utiliser le mot utilisateur. Merci.
Thank you, Côte d'Ivoire, for those comments. I'll now move to Togo and then India. Togo.
La Côte d'Ivoire a repris en partie mes préoccupations. Et nous sommes tout à fait d'accord avec l'Union européenne et la Suisse de supprimer compatible avec leur législation nationale, puisque ça y va de soi. C'est tellement évident, puisque nous recherchons à alléger les textes plutôt que de les compliquer. Donc, on peut enlever cette expression qui n'apporte rien de nouveau. Par contre, nous souhaitons, si on peut ajouter, donc les partis devraient prendre des mesures administratives, stratégiques ou législatives qui encouragent, incitent ou exigent. On peut encore ajouter. Donc, pour voilà, des contributions au Fonds mondial conformément aux modalités du mécanisme multilatéral. Je pense que c'est plus léger comme ça. Et par rapport à ce que le Chili a dit, c'est que les grandes entreprises, c'est un peu subjectif. À partir de quel moment une entreprise est grande? Là, il va falloir que nous définissions les critères qui permettent de distinguer d'une grande entreprise d'une petite entreprise. Est-ce c'est par rapport aux revenus, aux profits ou bien au secteur? Donc, on va encore rentrer dans un domaine qui va nous allonger les débats, les discussions. Et il y a une expression qui est à la fin, on a dit conformément aux modalités du mécanisme multilatéral. Donc, quel que soit ce que le pays aura à prendre, le pays doit s'assurer que cela est conforme aux modalités du mécanisme multilatéral. Donc déjà, ça règle tout. Merci, Madame la coprésidente.
Thank you, Togo, for your comments and also reflecting on what others have said. I'll give the floor now to India, followed by Kenya. India.
Well, the intent of para 5 is indeed welcome and is required also. My concern is along the lines that what Argentina has also mentioned. When we have to have a national legislation, I think there has to be a mechanism for the national government to find out as to what was the contribution that was to be made by a partner, by a company, and whether that compliance has been done or not. That means basically CBD will have to then provide us the information about the obligation of the company to contribute to the global fund. And then the second issue which will arise is how do we enforce that in a national legislation? We cannot have a national legislation which is in the nature of advisory to the company. So our legislation has to have a framework where we can enforce the measures that is obligated on the companies for contribution. So these are two basic issues which need to be resolved. Only then can the national legislation or administrative or policy framework which is extended to transnational companies or companies across a different jurisdiction and can really be made applicable. So what is that framework going to be? What is that legal framework that CBD is thinking of? These are the concerns that I wanted to raise here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, India. I'll now move to Kenya and then Japan.
Madam Koja, I've also been listening, and Kenya is in support of that statement with minor amendment. Just referring to the text we are talking about, Decision 15.9, I see a statement stating that the parties agrees that the approach to fair and equitable benefit sharing from the use of digital sequence information on genetic resource set out in the present decision does not affect existing rights and obligations under the Convention and NACOA Protocol, including, as applicable, those related to traditional knowledge and the rights of indigenous people and local communities, and is without prejudice to national access and benefit sharing measures. So this calls for minimum legislative, policy and administrative measures to be put in place to operationalize what we are doing. Otherwise, we may, we welcome that statement that there is need to invite parties to put in minimum policy and legislative measures to operationalize this multilateral process. Thank you very much.
The very first support to the proposition that was put forward by the co-chairs. I'll now move forward to Japan and then Colombia. Japan.
We do not support ensure as proposed by Chile. What needed is an incentive. The contribution to the global fund is supposed to be a positive practice, constructive practice for the conservation of biodiversity, for which what we need is an incentive. For this reason, we support the proposal made by Switzerland to incentivize and facilitate contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. I'll get the last parties so that we can move forward. We have noted the points of divergence and where we seem to agree. So we'll close the list. I'll have Colombia, Chile, Argentina, and then South Africa. Colombia followed by Chile.
Gracias, copresidenta. Sobre el párrafo 5, somos flexibles con la mención de consistent with national legislation. Sin embargo, luego de la explicación de Cuba y otros colegas, pues estaríamos de acuerdo con mantenerlo. Con respecto al resto del párrafo, y muy en el espíritu de lo mencionado por Chile y Cuba, preferiríamos en un principio haber mantenido el párrafo anterior. Sin embargo, quisiéramos sí añadir los comentarios, la primera parte de los comentarios de la modificación de Chile sobre ensure. Creo que puede haber otros espacios en el texto para generar incentivos para la participación en el mecanismo, pero el espíritu de este párrafo en particular debe ser el de generar estas contribuciones. Entonces, en cuanto a la mención de large transnational companies, como decía, estaríamos interesados en que se mantuviera la versión original. Sin embargo, dado los acuerdos a los que hemos llegado hasta ahora, podemos revisar qué otra opción hay, por ejemplo, usuarios. Entonces, gracias.
Thank you, Colombia, for the flexibility. I'll now give the floor to Chile and then Argentina. Chile.
Señora Presidenta, y gracias por permitirme volver a intervenir respecto a este punto. Mi intención es ser muy breve, intentar explicar un poco la lógica y de la propuesta. En reacción a lo que señaló la Unión Europea, nuestra intención no es enfatizar o profundizar diferenciaciones, sino que más bien ser consistente con lo que estamos planteando en términos de introducir ciertos factores correctivos que nos permitan identificar de manera justa y equitativa a cuáles van a ser los actores que van a contribuir en mayor envergadura, de mayor manera, a este mecanismo. Y en ese sentido, la propuesta de mantener la frase que hace referencia a las grandes empresas transnacionales está en línea con lo señalado en el párrafo 1 del texto, en el que se establece un criterio para distinguir empresas en función del porcentaje de sus ventas o de de la comercialización de sus productos. Además, quisiera destacar que en línea con lo que señaló Argentina, creemos que es conveniente agregar la mención a usuarios, pero esa mención a usuarios no es excluyente de hacer referencia a que dentro de esos usuarios, de manera preferente, queremos que las contribuciones provengan de las grandes empresas transnacionales. Eso no excluye que puedan haber otros usuarios que puedan hacer contribuciones, pero es bueno, para ser consistentes con lo que señala el párrafo 1 del documento, que haya una mención de que las medidas y acciones que tomen los países para asegurar o requerir que se hagan las contribuciones sean para los usuarios y en particular respecto a las grandes empresas transnacionales. Gracias.
Thank you, Chile. I'll give the floor to Argentina.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. Very briefly, a bit as introduced by Chile, our proposal was not an alternative to the one of Chile. Actually, we think they could be easily combined because ours referred more explicitly to the area of implementation of the requirements. So a party should require its users or its large transnational companies, its whatever is the subject of the requirement. So if we were to go with Chile's proposal, it would be their large and transnational companies. This is also, I think, important to avoid companies, in the case of the large and transnationals, being required in several countries to do the same thing. So they should be required in one place. Thank you.
Thank you. I see the EU requesting for the floor. Again, I guess this is in response to Chile, so you can have the floor.
For a further explanation on their intentions, which actually confirms that I cannot agree to the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, EU. We'll give a chance to NGO 1145, and then we'll move to paragraph 6. NGO 1145.
Yeah. This is a proposal for a placeholder text, because we heard a lot in the contact group about double payments, overlap, etc. So we're also very much concerned, like, for example, if a country establishes an open access database, for example, a country like Sri Lanka establishes its own database, open database, and say whoever comes to us through this database, collect the data, use it, give us national benefits. Would it overlap with the existing decision for a multilateral mechanism? Because it's also based on the classification of data falling in a public database. So with this concern in our mind, we are just proposing a proposal text here. It could be changed when we have more clarity on what the system is looking like. So the text is as follows. Parties may, by notification or other measures, determine the digital sequence information on genetic resources from their territory that are under the scope of multilateral mechanism, and require users to use CBD sequence database or the other database which we are talking about, and to share the benefits in line with the provisions of multilateral mechanism set out in the present decision. As I said, it's not like we are not proposing it as a final text, but we are keeping it that this possibility to be examined by parties that, how to avoid the overlap between nationally established open databases if that database is contributing to or facilitating a national ABS system. So I request party support for this proposal to keep as a placeholder text. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Okay, are there any party support? Of course, I'm not too sure if this is with regards to paragraph 4 or under the discussion that we are having on paragraph 5.
The existing sentence, that parties may by notification determine what DSI falls under the scope of CBD multilateral mechanism.
Okay, we will not go into a discussion on this one. I'll just check if there is any party support, and then we'll put it there. I see Egypt. All right, so it's there. And we'll move on just to summarize on paragraph 5 that we had discussed prior to the addition by the Third World Network. What we are getting is that we will not have the agreements on the verbs yet, which I think we accept. And then the other issue is that we have seen a number of additions. The first one is on the qualification of who should contribute, which is the large and transnational companies, which is going to be in brackets because there were some divergences around that. Consistent with national legislation, there were also some divergences around that. And there was a proposal by Switzerland to include incentivize, which we were not able to get any feedback from the other parties. And then finally, it was supported by Japan. Okay, thank you. And then I think then we had issues with the other verbs as usual. So this is how we can summarize this, and we hope for that those areas, I think we saw that the intent of this paragraph was generally supported, and we just have to find a way to address those divergences, and then we can move forward. So now we'll move forward to paragraph 6. So for paragraph 6, it's just about how those contributions may be made, whether directly or through the national authorities. I'll invite views on paragraph 6. I see Egypt and then Argentina. Egypt.
To propose the following addition. Receipt will be issued annually for each year in which contributions are made.
Thank you, Egypt. This is something that is also reflected in paragraph 7. Would you also want to see it reflected in paragraph 6 as well? Yeah. Microphone to Egypt.
Yes, please.
All right. So I'll now give the floor to Argentina.
Co-Chair, I'm sorry to actually bring you back. It was just a reflection on your conclusions on paragraph 5, if you allow me. At least from my recollection, the reference to consistent with national legislation was had some pushback from some delegations, but basically because they did not understand actually what was behind it. But I didn't hear any substantial opposition, and actually after the explanations and support from some parties, I had flexibility on that regard. But that's my recollection from it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Argentina, for the clarification on my summary. And if that is true, I think we'll really be very happy that we'll have less brackets on our side. And just before we move to paragraph 6, is there any objection that we reflected the way Argentina recollected from the summary that I made? If there is any party that would objecting on that, maybe you can raise your hand and then we'll put it in square brackets. I see none. You were right. So we'll continue with paragraph 6. I think it's straightforward with just the addition that was made by Egypt. I don't see any more requests for the floor for paragraph 6. We'll move to paragraph 7, and I'll hand over to my co-chair before somebody decides to mess up paragraph 6 again. So over to you, my co-chair, for paragraph 7.
Very good, very good. Well, thank you very much, Co-Chair, and thank you very much to everybody. We're flying through because of all the hard work previously. So, paragraph 7 is, of course, slightly longer. I think the intent of this paragraph is fairly clear. I think capturing it is difficult. I think, we've got this concept of receipts at the end of the paragraph, and I think we've just seen that brought into paragraph 6. So it seems as though, there was no objection to it in paragraph 6. I hope, therefore, we can work on the basis that at least the last part of paragraph 7 might be agreeable to you all. I think it would be useful at this point to have a discussion about paragraph 7, and hope that we can quickly move forward. Thank you very much. So I see Côte d'Ivoire and then Chile. Côte d'Ivoire, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président, je suis d'accord avec le paragraphe, mais je suggère qu'on en fasse deux parties, parce que quand on garde le paragraphe comme ça devient lourd. Que la partie relative au reçu soit dans un autre alinéa, pas que ce soit collé à ce qui précède en fait. Juste ça. On en fasse deux parties. Merci.
Thank you, Côte d'Ivoire. A suggestion to improve the sort of ease of reading and split the paragraph into two. Welcome reactions to that. Chile and Argentina.
Gracias, señor presidente. Mi intervención es más una pregunta para tener más claridad sobre la intención de la frase que se agregó al párrafo 7 respecto a los recibos que serían otorgados anualmente cada año. Como mencioné anteriormente, el tema de la frecuencia del pago, que tiene dos elementos. Uno es, me refiero en concreto a lo que señala el párrafo 2, tiene dos elementos sobre la frecuencia, dado que por una parte estamos hablando de la opción de que el porcentaje que se contribuya sea sobre las ganancias o sobre las ventas, pero ahí no hay claridad si esas ganancias o ventas son anuales o por más de un año, no hay una especificación, ¿no?, del tiempo respecto del cual estamos hablando de esas ganancias. Y el segundo elemento es el número de veces o de oportunidades en que estos usuarios van a tener que hacer contribuciones. Entendería que lo que señala el párrafo 7 en su última parte asume que el pago será anual o la contribución será anual, con lo cual se podría resolver el tema de la frecuencia del pago. Quisiera en ese sentido consultarle para tener más claridad si es esa la intención, ¿no? Gracias.
Thank you, Chile, for the opportunity to explain. I think that's right. I think I think there are two observations here, and then I think we can bring them together. I think the first observation is yours, which is that there needs to be consistency between paragraphs 2 and paragraph 7. I think there's probably agreement in the room to that, but the room can correct me. But I think I agree. And then the second observation, I think, is that we heard over the course of the past few days a number of parties suggesting that receipts would be an important part both of the sort of compliance process, but also a way of incentivizing businesses to be involved in the scheme. And we also heard a number of suggestions that those certificates could be issued annually. So I think if you combine those two ideas, it does indeed suggest that if we were to think about as a group a time frame in paragraph 2, it could be annual. But I don't want to, that is for you to tell me as co-chair, but I think that's a helpful set of observations I think you've made. That's very helpful. So very much welcome reflections. Argentina, South Africa and Switzerland.
Much, Mr. Chair. So the question that when we read the current para 7 we have is what's the scope of the DSI under the multilateral mechanism, which is not clear for us where it's clarified in the document. In our view, the scope of the DSI under the multilateral mechanism is DSI that is or has been shared in public databases in compliance with national ABS legislation where applicable, because we understand that in some cases this is not applicable. So whether this is clarified here or somewhere else, we are flexible, but it has to be clear that it's not because you make a contribution to the fund that if you use a DSI from a particular MAT that you were not supposed to publish, etc., and it's subject to particular conditions. I'm talking about very specific cases, not the general rule, basically. Then if you go to the mechanism directly, then you are free from everything else that your MAT may said regarding the particular genetic resource, genetic material. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. And I want to get this, I want to check everyone's understood this, because I think this is very important. If I've understood correctly, and you correct me if I'm wrong, the point that you're saying is that a payment, a monetary contribution to the fund in line with the provisions of the multilateral mechanism can only be used to demonstrate conformity with the use of DSI under the multilateral mechanism. It cannot be used to demonstrate that you have met the terms of any other MAT or any other agreement that you might have with anybody else. And so the question is, how do we capture that intent in the decision? And your suggestion is it doesn't need to happen here, but effectively it's those words arising from the use of DSI under the multilateral mechanism. We need to find some way of being specific about what that is. Have I understood that well?
Mr. Chair, yes, you understood correctly. I think this also the reference that this is not somehow saying that if something flows into the public databases and that flew and it was uploaded ignoring basically some regulation, now because you just used it from the database, that's okay. So there's a small nuance there as well. Thank you.
Understand the microphone to Argentina.
Thank you very much. We also understand that it is very difficult to enforce this, and we know that, and it's not that we are requesting here a track and trace mechanism to understand who uses what DSI, etc. But in legal terms, we feel uncomfortable with the fact that we seem to be somehow providing a loophole if we don't have these small nuances to the regulations that do exist and to the Nagoya Protocol and to a certain extent. Thank you.
Argentina, I think the point is that we need to be clear that the certificate is being issued, or the certificate that is being issued certifies precisely the right thing and nothing more, is what we need to try and solve. Now, I'm not clever enough to solve that, but I'm sure that the people in this room are. So, South Africa, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. South Africa.
Yeah. I just have a question with regard to the last part of this paragraph, around the fact that receipts will be issued annually, and to ask the question as to whether this is a specific time in the year, a date, a specific cut-off date, or is this going to be randomly throughout the year? Because I'm trying to link this to a possible solution in paragraph 12. If it was a window opening, you'd want maximum to be at the start of that project-based window. So I'm just wanting to see if this would be aligned somehow with, if that were an option we go with. Thank you.
Very much, South Africa. So we have a few ideas here. We have a sort of an invitation from Chile to make sure that this is aligned with the payment window that we've got in paragraph 2. We've got a suggestion from South Africa to make sure this is aligned with any disbursement window in paragraph 12, and to be clear about when this might happen. I think these are good questions, and I welcome answers from you all. So Switzerland, UK, Uganda.
Chair. So as indicated before, we think that paragraph 7 is really a very important paragraph because this is now related to incentives, which means that if users contribute to the fund, they should have an incentive that gives them some proof that they are in compliance with the provisions that we are setting out in this decision. And so therefore, we generally agree that it would be good to have some kind of receipts, but for us this is not sufficient. So we do not only need the receipts, but we also have to know what this means. And so we would clarify this in the text. First, on the second line, to say instead of that users are considered to be in conformity, we would like to see the wording in compliance with the requirements related to the fair and equitable sharing of benefits under the multilateral mechanism. And then we would say certificates providing proof of compliance of the respective users and excluding them from any additional benefit sharing claims from the use of DSI will be issued. So, and I think the second part is really important from also regarding the discussions that you just had before. We really have to know with these certificates what they mean, and this will provide legal certainty to users that make these contributions, and this will be the main incentive for users and will ultimately lead to an effective implementation of the whole mechanism. Thank you.
Very much. So repeat the sentence citing certificates.
So it could read, certificates providing proof of compliance of the respective users and excluding them from any additional benefit sharing claims from the use of digital sequence information on genetic resources. And then it continues.
Thank you very much, Switzerland. Clear. So colleagues, do build on each other's suggestions. There's a helpful set of questions now. United Kingdom, Uganda and the EU.
Mr. Co-Chair, and I'm afraid I've not quite had time to reflect on Switzerland's proposal to build on it now. But I did have a similar question in my mind that South Africa had raised. And in that sense, I think we can improve the last part of the paragraph on receipts. In the way that it's currently phrased, it suggests that all those payments would be paid on the same day annually. But I don't think in practice that those payments would all be made in that way. And I don't think users would necessarily want to wait to be issued a receipt on that particular day, but receive it at the point at which they make their payment. So in that sense, I do have a text suggestion, and it could read, under the DSI, under the multilateral mechanism, and then comma in the new text, for each annual contribution, receipts will be issued when payments are made. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
UK, so after benefits arising from the use of DSI under the multilateral mechanism, and for each annual contribution, receipts will be issued for the payments made. Thank you very much, UK. So, the EU and then India.
Thank you, Co-Chair. On paragraph 7, we have the following observations. We note that this para seeks to incentivize contributions. However, it is from the spirit of what is there already. This provision could inadvertently lead to superficial compliance, where users contribute to the fund without genuinely engaging in meaningful benefit sharing. So we actually agree with the inclusion of in compliance as proposed by Switzerland. But then we do not agree and would like to bracket the proposition by Switzerland of certificates providing proof of compliance at the end of the inclusion based on the following reasons. Compliance is good and paying is good, but that should not be the end of benefit sharing. It should not end there that a user who has paid in money should therefore be excluded from any other obligations just on the basis of having paid into the fund. So we propose that we include, apart from the monetary contributions, we include non-monetary contributions as well, such that the obligation does not end at a merely transactional basis, and the commitment to the fund and to the mechanism should be holistic and should cover including ethical and biodiversity conservation issues as contained in Decision 59. So therefore, Chair, we propose that we add non-monetary contributions, but while we are not in problem with the issuance of certificates, we have very serious reservations with the inclusion of excluding them from any further benefit sharing claims, and we think that is not acceptable to us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. That's very helpful. Let's keep going. So, European Union, India, and Norway, EU.
Thank you very much. We initially thought that that was a simple, straightforward, and helpful paragraph. As usual, there have been a number of brilliant proposals which seek to make it perfect. And as we all know, the old saying is, perfection is the enemy of the good. Let me start with the reflections by Argentina, and perhaps he can clarify that these are reflection of principle not to be included in paragraph 7, but that it is their intention to come back to this issue in a separate paragraph. I think that would be helpful in that regard, so maybe he can clarify that. We do support the spirit of the Swiss proposal. Having said that, I somehow have the feeling that it goes down the route of having two certificates issued. One is a receipt and then a certificate of compliance. Maybe I understood it wrongly, but the way I noted it down, there seemed to be two processes for that thing. So I'm wondering whether it's not possible to sort of have the automatic issuing of the receipt which shall serve as a certificate of compliance, and therefore exclude any claims for additional monetary benefit sharing for the year in question out of the multilateral mechanism. And I think that in that sense, I would also reflect on the proposal made by Uganda, because I think that we can and we should have that certificate of compliance with regard to monetary benefit sharing. Now, we have had a long discussion on non-monetary benefit sharing and its relationship to the multilateral mechanism, and I think we have come to the understanding that the multilateral mechanism, whatever way we turn it, will never capture the totality of the non-monetary benefit sharing that is autonomously done by parties. And maybe there will be some limited form of facilitation by some frameworks and clearinghouses under the convention, but certainly not to the sense that we would at the end of the year say we have a complete picture of all non-monetary benefit sharing, and therefore we have to wait until we have all the reports on all non-monetary benefit sharing to now enable the certificate of compliance. And I think what Uganda is proposing is simply too challenging, too time-consuming, and probably not even feasible. I also understood him to say that the certificate of compliance should include ethical and biodiversity considerations, which I do not see how it could be included in a certificate of compliance. So from our perspective, since we are here talking about monetary contributions to the fund, for which we can get receipt, I would argue that we should limit paragraph 7 to those considerations and be very clear in the certificate of compliance that we're talking about having satisfied all requirements with regard to monetary benefit sharing from the use of DSI. And then we have to have the discussion with Argentina held in public databases and whatever other conditions Argentina might have in mind. I think that the proposal by the UK on the issue of the receipt, which in our view should serve as certificate of compliance, that should be issued when payment is made, with the validity for the year in question. So I think if we actually have those things clear, we have an operational paragraph. I think we need to avoid a paragraph that actually makes it impossible to issue certificates of compliance, and I'm afraid that is what we may go down to if we load the paragraph with too many conditions and with too many elements that are difficult to measure. So I would very much hope that we can go as much as possible back to the original paragraph with some of the additions that the UK and Switzerland have suggested. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't need to listen to myself. Thank you very much, the European Union. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to follow, I think, the very good suggestion of Côte d'Ivoire, which is to break this into two sentences, but that is effectively two ideas, right? And so in the first idea, there's this statement that users that make monetary contributions to the fund are considered to be in conformity. Now, the question is in conformity with what? And I think our colleague from Uganda has made quite a reasonable observation that it doesn't discharge them from all obligations. I think the intent of this paragraph is that it's meant to be saying that they are discharged from the requirements related to the fair and equitable sharing of monetary benefits. I think I'll sort of ask our friend from Uganda to come in again in a moment, but I think a possible solution to that particular problem might be to insert monetary into the third line. So where it says requirements related to the fair and equitable sharing of monetary benefits. So then the paragraph is effectively silent on the question of whether someone who has put money into the fund has discharged their obligations with respect to non-monetary benefits. It is silent on that, and those obligations will be whatever else we decide in the other paragraphs in the decision. So that's a suggestion for that question. In fact, then we've heard not much on the first half of the paragraph. Actually, we've heard a suggestion from Switzerland to be in compliance with, and we'll reflect that in the text. And there's a question, I think, for Argentina about this question about DSI under the multilateral mechanism, and if my colleague will allow, we'll bring him back in a moment. So I think that's okay. So then full stop, and then a sentence about receipts, and I think there we have some formulations that have been proposed by a few parties. I think we can reflect those. They are stronger or weaker in various ways, and so I think we can reflect those as a list of options for you. So I think if we break the sentences into two, I think we have quite a solid basis already. Let's take a few more interventions, and then we'll move on. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Taking forward the discussion that we are having on this issue, The point that I wanted to make was that when we are saying that monetary contribution to the fund in line with the provisions of multilateral mechanism means that this is in conformity with the requirements related to the fair and equitable sharing of monetary benefits, as you're saying. The 2 points that I wanted to raise was that we need to qualify monetary contribution in terms of the specified amount and the periodicity. Going by the intent of para 7, it looks like we are looking at annual contributions. So probably we may add here users that make specified annual monetary contributions to the fund. So whatever is specified, if that is paid, then it is can be construed as being, conformity with the requirements. So if the specified amount is not paid, then it is not in conformity. So that is the point I wanted to make. Thank you.
India. Let's hear from Norway and then Egypt. Norway.
Mr. Co-Chair, so I agree on your new proposed structure in the para. So a lot has been said. I just want to point out that if this system works, we'll be receiving, or the fund will be receiving millions of payments, right? So it has to be an automated system. We can't sit there and, or somebody can't sit there and stamp certificates, right? I mean, this has to be really easy, has to be a light system. So those are my points. I think the EU had a good suggestion that the receipt, which will be automated, will also serve as a certificate of compliance. I think that's straightforward, and we probably don't need to say more than that. Thank you.
We could always track and trace the receipts. Yeah. Very good. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, it's been a long week. Right. Egypt and then Cuba. I'm so sorry. Egypt and then Cuba.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Just trying to reflect on the issue that has been raised by Argentina. So I'm proposing this language. Receipt for the required annual contribution of user of DSI will indicate compliance with the requirement under this multilateral benefit sharing mechanism, provided that the use sequence have been legally published on a public database and with the approval of the national authorities of the country of origin of the genetic material from which the DSI is derived. I think this covers what was raised by Argentina and India and several other countries. Do you want me to repeat again? Okay. So receipt for the required annual contribution of users of DSI will indicate compliance with the requirements under this multilateral benefit sharing mechanism, provided that the use sequences have been legally published on a public database with the approval of the national authorities of the country of origin of the genetic material from which the DSI is derived. Thank you.
Thank you, Egypt. I really welcome the spirit of that suggestion. So let's hear some reactions to that. So Cuba, Canada, and then Argentina. Cuba.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Es muy interesante las reflexiones porque ayuda a identificar algunas cosas que no habíamos visto en una primera lectura, pero por supuesto es muy lógico la división de los párrafos porque yo creo que se trata de dos temas distintos. Pero ahora mismo me llama poderosamente la atención la interpretación que se hace del cumplimiento de la contribución monetaria. es que se dice, bueno, are considered to be in conformity with the requirement related to the fair. O sea, lo que estamos diciendo es que el pago está expresando que estamos, digamos, destacándonos en ese tipo de responsabilidad. Sin embargo, en el párrafo 5, en la versión que está, dice, contribution to the global fund in line with the modality of the multilateral mechanism. Y no dice más nada. Entonces, esta adición que tiene párrafo 7, realmente no lo veo necesario y me gustaría, digamos, ajustarlo a lo que dice el párrafo 5. O sea, las contribuciones son con algo más abstracto que es lo que en línea con las modalidades del fondo, del mecanismo multilateral. Y nos quitaríamos esa tipificación de la contribución que puede ser controvertida y no necesariamente estar ajustada al tema de la distribución justa y equitativa. Lo segundo es una cuestión de proceso, porque yo creo que las ideas sobre el certifico, la confirmación, están bastante claras en cuanto a tiempo, pero mi pregunta es que ¿quién emite ese certifico? Estaba yo leyendo el párrafo 14 ter, que tal vez nos pudiera dar algún tipo de arquitectura institucional sobre eso, porque entiendo que la preocupación de los países donde van a estar estas empresas es para cerrar su ciclo financiero ante las autoridades económicas y van a necesitar, digamos, un documento con cierta oficialidad o oficialmente que indique que ese pago se hizo, ese pago se recibió y en consecuencia se confirma. Pero yo creo que si ya estamos de acuerdo en que hay un párrafo específico sobre confirmación de pago, habría que indicar quién emite ese certifico, porque es un mandato que las partes le van a dar a cualquiera que sea o asuma esa responsabilidad. Gracias.
Cuba. Let me take 3 more parties and then I'll sum up. So Canada, Argentina and the EU. Canada, you have the floor.
We do appreciate the spirit of the Swiss proposal, and we've been trying to work out how to get that balance that I think we're all seeking so that there are strong enough incentives for users, because I believe we ultimately want to get a lot of money into this fund for biodiversity conservation, sustainable use and capacity building from a lot of users. And as Norway expressed, we'll want an automated system to keep up. We want so many contributors to be sending money in. And to answer Cuba, I would suggest it makes sense that the issue of receipts would come from the fund, because that's where the money's going in. But as well as these incentives, we recognize that we also need that assurance for countries that provided the original genetic resources. We were going to try to come up with additional language, but I think we're happy to work with what Switzerland and the EU have proposed. And I think, Co-Chair, you've captured the point well about how to structure that paragraph. I can't resist just proposing a simple deletion, though, which is that we could take out requirements related to the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the use of DSI under the multilateral mechanism. So it would be, basically in conformity with the multilateral mechanism and receipts issued annually. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Canada. Let's hear from Argentina and the EU. Argentina.
Sure. And just to clarify, I think that you did a good job when you came up with this idea of DSI under the multilateral mechanism, because that allows us, if we want to work somewhere else on trying to capture what's DSI under the multilateral mechanism without trying to define DSI. But having said that, we can do that. We can try to do that. But this paragraph is linked to the result of the discussion on that paragraph, definitely. So that's the answer to the point by the EU. It's not an idea of how to operationalize paragraph 7. It's a conceptual idea that we need capture somewhere in the decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. I think that is really well understood now. That's good. European Union, you have the floor, and then we'll move on.
Hoping for, we recognize that is a discussion that we need to have, and I think it's a discussion that we're actually keen to have at some point. But we understand it's not in the context of paragraph 7. I think that we do appreciate the simple but important simplification that Canada has suggested with regard to this paragraph, and we fully support it. I think we should keep paragraph 7 simple, and recall that Decision 59 talks about simple, efficient solutions that generate more revenues than costs, and that it should actually provide legal clarity and certainty. I have to say that all the additions that I've heard today with regard to that paragraph are not in conformity with any of these criteria. We are in the context of, in the EU, when we discuss legislation, very often member states, when they implement it, engage in the very good activity of legislative gold plating, which is making legislation so perfect that it becomes almost impossible to implement. And I think with all the additions that I've heard, we are in big danger of doing the same here. I think that the simple starting point was under the terms of 59, users are required to undertake monetary benefit sharing. They will do that by making contributions to the fund. Once they actually have made contributions to the fund, they have actually satisfied the requirement for monetary benefit sharing with regard to DSI in public databases, recognizing that Argentina is saying we need a further discussion on what it means. And that once they have done this, they are in compliance with the requirements, as Canada has suggested, of the multilateral mechanism. And I think that is what it is. And I think if we start importing all the issues that are controversial in other paragraphs with regard to legality assurance, provenance assurance, and so on and so forth, we will end up with an unpractical paragraph. So we would very much favor to go back to a very simple and basic 2 paragraphs, as you have suggested, which I think would also solve the issue of the suggestion by Egypt to have a reference to receipt both in paragraph 6 and 7, because if the reference to receipt is in a separate paragraph, it actually is self-standing in the context of that decision, and therefore is applicable to both paragraphs, and we won't need to repeat it on both sides. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, everyone. So, it's very difficult. So we've agreed that we're going to split paragraph 7. There will be a new 7 bis that will refer to receipts. We have a number of options for receipts, some helpful suggestions from a number of parties. And there's also, we will reflect all of those. There is also a reference to receipts in paragraph 6 as well, which we can incorporate, not incorporate, but we can reflect next to the wording in 7 bis, so that that's clear. I think there's been some light edits to the bulk of paragraph 7, but they're quite slight. We can reflect those in the usual way and put those back to you. I think that we've heard a very helpful exchange, I think, about what DSI, the phrase is DSI under the multilateral mechanism. And I think what we've recognized is that actually I recall, we used that phrase several times in the decision. And I think we're beginning to uncover that there are paragraphs that, we need to have a better understanding of what that means so that we can use that phrase across the decision. We won't have that conversation right now, but there are places in a COP decision where we can, capture an understanding, a joint understanding of what that means. So we'll have that conversation in future. We're making very good time. Let's move on to paragraph 8, please. We had an exchange on this yesterday. We had a helpful exchange. There were helpful points raised. It's unchanged from the version of the previous non-paper on the basis that we struggled, I think, to find exactly the right way of capturing the intent of what we'd heard from the room. So as we as co-chairs see paragraph 8, what we're trying to say is that at any point in time, any additional contributions to effectively anybody else in terms of money will be welcome. That's what we're trying to express. It's quite basic. The challenge is, of course, that some businesses, under the terms of the multilateral mechanism, will already be encouraged or obliged or facilitated or required or should or shall or will. They will already be contributing. So there is a slight complexity there. And I think we either appreciate some suggestions as to how we can solve that slight complexity, or we hope that this paragraph will be acceptable. I open the floor for comments, and I see Chile. You have the floor.
En los intercambios que tuvimos respecto a este párrafo, en algunas partes dejaron clara la idea de que la intención es que otros entidades privadas puedan hacer aportes voluntarios adicionales al fondo. Y específicamente nos estaríamos refiriendo a aquellas entidades privadas que no usan DSI, por lo tanto que no están comprendidas dentro de las contribuciones que se tienen que hacer bajo el mecanismo, sino que son adicionales. En ese sentido, nuestra idea era que no hubiera señales confusas de que en un párrafo se refiriera a entidades privadas como fondos adicionales y en los anteriores nos estuviéramos refiriendo a entidades privadas, pero bajo otras reglas y otras disposiciones. Para distinguir entre ambas, proponemos agregar una breve modificación y en este párrafo señalar contributions to the global fund from business that do not use DSI. Porque entendemos que, de acuerdo a lo que otras partes señalaron, esa es la intención. O sea, abrir la posibilidad de que empresas que no usan DSI voluntariamente quieran contribuir con fondos adicionales. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much indeed, Chile. So the proposal would be, I think you would in that formulation, you would strike through additional. Is that right? And it would say contributions to the global fund from businesses that do not use DSI, non-profit or philanthropic organizations and governments are encouraged, or would you retain the additional?
I just didn't read all the sentences.
Very much, Chile. So let's have some reactions, please. Norway and then Australia. Norway.
Thank you, Mr. Coach. So my initial reflection here was to strike out or delete additional because it can be confused with you know the with the companies or the users that are on the scope, right? That we want additional contributions from them. But I think actually here there might be merit in using voluntary contributions, right? Because if we are using as hard vocabulary as we can in the soft law instrument, then we might use voluntary to sort of as to contrast the more sort of close to obligatory language which we have in other parts of the decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Norway, and sorry to put you on the spot, but just so I've understood. So your suggestion would be to keep the paragraph as it stands, but replace additional with voluntary, so voluntary contributions to the Global Fund from businesses, non-profit. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I think, you know, the para sort of says what we want to say. We're almost there. It's just to sort of get rid of those well, confusement, I guess. Thanks.
Thank you, Norway. Let's hear from Australia and Togo.
Chair. I think we should have the paragraph as it was drafted. It's nice and simple, and I think the rationale behind this, I don't really have a problem with Norway's additional or voluntary. I don't think we should limit it to that do not use DSI. So I've got 2 points to make. If businesses are paying their X% and they want to pay more, let's let them. So I think that we shouldn't limit that scope. And further to that, there are many, many other funds that they could contribute voluntarily to. If they don't use DSI, why would they contribute to this fund? So again, by limiting the scope to not using DSI, we open it up to everybody, even those, if we have we've been talking about having a proportion of DSI use or some sort of threshold or something like that. The small business and medium businesses who want that stamp of approval from us as the Conference of Parties to the CBD as helping out their MLM, then let's let them do it. Let's leave it as open as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Australia, so support there, I think, for the Norwegian suggestion, or support for the original wording, but also support for the voluntary wording from Norway, which I think is very good. Let's hear from Togo and then Brazil.
Merci, Monsieur le Co-président. Nous nous inscrivons également dans la proposition de la Norvège, soutenue par mon prédécesseur. Donc, on ajoute volontaire et on supprime supplémentaire. Même les entreprises qui utilisent l'ICN, si elles sont en conformité avec les modalités, s'il faut payer $100 et qu'une entreprise le paye en mesure de nous donner encore $100, est-ce qu'on va refuser? Donc, je crois bien que celles qui utilisent n'utilisent pas. Étant donné que c'est volontaire, nous devons, le fonds pourra prendre ces contributions volontaires-là. Merci, Monsieur le Co-président.
Thank you very much, Togo. Let's hear from Brazil and Canada.
To support the spirit of the comments made by Chile and Norway, I think we are going the same direction in the sense that we should separate clearly what is voluntary and what is not voluntary. I think that's the important element to be kept. We're very flexible on the language. We're not, English is not my mother language, but just to give an idea of the kind of pitfalls that we might fall in. If we say additional voluntary contributions, for instance, that's, at least in my view, seems to imply that the previous contributions were voluntary. So that's the kind of pitfall that we want to avoid, and I trust your English language skills to find a solution for that. But I think this paragraph should be really short and clear, and the idea is very basic, that voluntary commitments and non-voluntary should not be mixed. And I take this opportunity to answer to an earlier comment made by the European Union on monetary benefits, because I think the same logic applies here. The question is not to prohibit companies to provide non-monetary benefits if they want to, but non-monetary benefits should be voluntary. Voluntary measures. I mean, we don't. I think that in the previous discussions, there was some misunderstanding again on the mixing between voluntary and non-voluntary measures. And the thing is, it's clear that we do not want to exclude the possibility that any business company, any user, make voluntary additional non-monetary sharing of non-monetary benefits, but that should not be mixed with the payments. There are non-voluntary. That's the idea. I think the same philosophy applies here of separating what is voluntary and non-voluntary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brazil. Let's hear from Canada, Egypt, the EU, and then we will come to a close on this. So Canada.
Thank you, Co-Chair. We're not very happy with the insertion of voluntary here. We think there's some confusion with paragraph 2 potentially by doing that. We would prefer to remind you of wording we suggested whenever it was, I don't know, yesterday, last week, which was additional contributions to the Global Fund from other individuals, businesses, non-profit or philanthropic organizations. So we'd like to have that more in the spirit of what Chile was suggesting, bringing those on board who aren't necessarily making monetary benefits from DSI, but who are interested in furthering this DSI monetary benefit sharing picture. Another we could add are also encouraged. Either additional contributions are also encouraged, but we would want to bracket voluntary. Thank you.
Let's hear from Egypt and the EU.
Mr. Chair, I think we need to drop all the qualifier, because if we just say contribution from business, non-profit and philanthropic organization, government to the Global Fund are generally encouraged, it means that even if they are voluntary or mandatory or whatever, we do encourage people to fund, whether on voluntary or mandatory base. So it both applies. Because even if you are doing what you are mandated to do, we encourage that. We appreciate it. So we don't need to add any qualifier to say mandatory or voluntary. Any contribution is greatly encouraged from the business or from whoever that. Even if he is mandated to do it, we are happy.
So that's smart, Egypt. Sorry, I think that's smart, right? So basically what we are saying is we have 7, 8 paragraphs before this that detail what businesses should be providing, right? And that, through the series of those paragraphs, that becomes something that is, it's more than voluntary, it's more than additional, it's an encourage, whatever. But you're saying that the verb encouraged, it captures the fact that those who we are asking to do this, they're encouraged to do it, and it also encourages those people who aren't in the rest of the decision to do it too. It's quite an interesting proposal, I think, from Egypt to simply start with contributions to the fund will always be encouraged, whether they are on the basis of the obligations that are laid out in the previous part of the decision, or whether they are actually on the basis of being simply additional. So let's reflect on that interesting suggestion from Egypt, and I'll bring in the EU.
Thank you. I have to say that we are having a difficult discussion on the voluntary versus mandatory nature of the contributions that we have here. And I think from our perspective, the only way out is to be as unclear about that as possible. The use, and I think I understand where Canada is coming from, the use of voluntary in paragraph 8 actually would indicate that the other contributions are actually mandatory. So I think that we were quite happy with the original language because it actually says it's contributions that are additional to the contributions that are dealt with in paragraphs 2 to 7. So why don't we go back to the original language? I think this language is fine. I just wanted to reflect a little bit on the Brazilian colleagues' comments on non-monetary benefit sharing, and I think I fully agree with him in the sense that he actually describes the voluntary nature of non-monetary binding benefit sharing and its additionality to monetary benefit sharing under paragraphs 2 to 7. I think if we all follow this logic, that should help us to solve also the problem with regard to paragraph 7 and the receipt, and which should serve as a certificate of compliance in that regard, and should also be a good basis for further agreement on paragraph 3 in that regard. And let's bear these reflections that Brazil has shared in mind. Thank you.
EU. So I hear the EU and the Canadian suggestion to go back to additional. So we can present this to you with the options that we've heard in the room. I just, in the spirit of trying to achieve something very clean and very crisp, I just want to push you one more time on the proposal from Egypt. The paragraph would simply say contributions to the Global Fund from businesses, non-profit or philanthropic organizations and governments are encouraged. The rationale there being that whatever the other obligations that may or may not arise through the rest of the MLM, the fact is contributions will always be encouraged. Could we accept that language? Please raise your hand if you can't accept contributions to the fund. European Union, tell us.
I'm just putting myself into the mind of a user that reads that decision once it's adopted. And you have a sort of paragraphs 2 to 7 detail, in great detail, what contributions are all about. And then suddenly 8 says contributions are encouraged. And you will say, well, wait a minute, there are very detailed provisions on where contributions should come from, how high they should be, how they should be made, and their certificate of compliance. And then suddenly in paragraph 1 said, and contributions are encouraged. I mean, I find that slightly inconsistent. Having been part of this conversation, of course, I understand it. But I'm very mindful of that in a few years' time, there will be many people who will have no idea what we will discuss here. And the important thing is that those people actually can use this text and read it and understand it in operational ways. So I think I'm just saying it's slightly in danger of being confusing to those who have not been part to our conversation.
So that's very helpful. So thank you. It's often not helpful if the co-chairs just keep throwing ideas at you. And I'm just trying to think of a way to handle this. I mean, I think combining, I think the Egyptian proposal to start with contributions, but also the points raised by the EU. I think there is a version of wording that might work, which is something like contributions additional to those provided for in paragraphs 2 to 7. So contributions that are additional to the contributions that we've just obligated through the first part of the decision. Contributions additional to paragraphs 2 to 7, those provided for in paragraph 2 to 7 from businesses, they are encouraged. I think though we're in, I see a lot of hands. Okay. Good. Oh, I see even a physical hand. Well, good. Well, Jordan, given your enthusiasm, Jordan, please come in. Tell us what you think.
شكرا سيد الرئيس المشارك. أريد أن أوضح أمر هام جدا هنا. عندما أنا أقوم بالالتزام بدفع الضرائب المستحقة علي للدولة وبانتظام، قد تكون الدولة تكافئني بخصومات أو بأمر معين، وإن دفعت بأمر تطوعي أكثر مما هو مطلوب كما هذا يعتبر تشجيع. في العبارة الفقرة الثامنة أجد أنها تشجع. احنا اتفقنا في الفقرات السابقة على أساس لمن يجب أن يلتزم في المساهمة في الصندوق ضمن المعايير والإجراءات المتفق عليها سابقا. هنا لمن يريد، لمن لم يتطبق عليه الشروط أو أراد أن يساهم بطوعا أو بإرادته كمساهمات إضافية، ويرحب في ذلك ويشجع على هذا الأمر. فهكذا أنا أفهمها، وهكذا أتوقع أنها هذه الرسالة المطلوبة والتي نذهب إليها، خاصة أننا أشرنا هنا إلى منظمات غير ربحية أو خيرية أو حكومات، كما هو الحال في تأسيس أي صناديق طوعية أخرى تساهم في تنفيذ الإطار. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
More hands. Let's take those quickly, and then we'll move on, because I think we've got plenty of material to help develop a solution. So I see Chile, South Africa, Japan.
La verdad que en este punto nuestra preocupación original era justamente, y un poco en línea con lo que ha señalado la Unión Europea, no dar una señal confusa. Puesto que este párrafo se refería a los negocios o empresas usando el verbo encourage, ¿no? Y podía ser una señal confusa respecto a cuál es la condición o la forma en que esas empresas deben hacer contribuciones. Por lo tanto, eliminar la palabra adicional justamente genera esa confusión, ¿no? Porque el entendimiento con adicional es para nosotros que se agrega a aquello que esas empresas tienen que hacer conforme a los párrafos anteriores. Por lo tanto, mantener el concepto de adicionalidad es crítico y muy relevante. Ahora, en el espíritu de lo que hemos conversado y intercambiado, efectivamente, si ese es el espíritu, se puede mantener una referencia amplia a empresas. Probablemente no sea necesario referirse a empresas que no usan DSI, entendiendo que estamos hablando de aquellas contribuciones adicionales a las que se han establecido en los párrafos anteriores. Gracias.
Thank you very much. We will move on shortly. Let me hear from South Africa and Japan, and then I think we must move on. Sorry to those who we won't come to, but we've got plenty of ideas now. So South Africa, please.
We got a good explanation by the previous speaker, so I'm in agreement. We keep additional, and the sentence was perfect as it was. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, South Africa. So Japan, you have the floor, and then we must move on.
Mr. Chair, it is better to keep additional, otherwise the intention of this paragraph will not be correctly conveyed to the general public when the decision is adopted. This intentions paragraph is that anybody can contribute. Global Fund is collecting money from all sources in addition to paragraph 2. So I think it is better to keep additional. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We'll reflect on that conversation, and we'll reflect some of the options back to you later. I'm going to hand over to my co-chair, who's going to take us into paragraph 9. Thank you all.
Thank you. We have 30 minutes more, and hopefully we'll be able to achieve additional paragraphs. I have a proposal for paragraph 8. It just sets out the principles. Paragraph 9. It just sets out the principles under which the funds should be allocated, as well as paragraph 10 talks about something that we already have in decision 15/9, and it's just an emphasis. And I would propose that maybe for these paragraphs that are simple and just on principles, and also on what was already set out in decision 15/9, maybe we should not spend too much time on them. I would propose we take them as they are, unless other parties have really strong objections to this proposal. I would invite you to comment. Otherwise, I think this should be one of those few paragraphs in this document that are straightforward and reflecting on something that is already in Decision 15/9. All right. I see India, Togo, and DRC Congo. Please comment on whether we can just take these paragraphs as they are in their simplicity, or if there is something that is really missing that you'd like to be reflected. I would invite you to do that. I see we have India and then Togo. India.
So, sorry, that was in reference to para 8 now. So I'll come to this para later. Thank you.
Thank you, India. Togo.
Merci, Madame la coprésidente. Si le texte fait unanimité, comme vous l'avez dit, donc on s'excuse de prendre la parole. Madame la coprésidente, pour nous, il y a un problème de cohérence et de compréhension globale du paragraphe 10. La deuxième phrase du paragraphe indique qu'en particulier, le financement devait être utilisé pour appuyer la réalisation des objectifs de la Convention. Je l'ai dit aujourd'hui que la Convention a 3 objectifs. Je ne sais pas si je me trompe. Or, l'énoncé de la première phrase parle seulement des 2 objectifs. Donc, si la deuxième phrase, nous estimons qu'en particulier, le financement devrait être utilisé pour appuyer la réalisation des objectifs de la Convention, alors pourquoi le 13e objectif n'est pas mentionné dans la première phrase et a été dilué ou même évacué, à mon avis? De plus, appuyer la réalisation des objectifs de la Convention dans le contexte du fonds n'est pas en réalité un aspect, c'est beaucoup plus général en fait. Ce n'est pas tel que c'est dit en particulier, non. Pour nous, ça en fait un aspect général. Le particulier maintenant, c'est de ce qui est vraiment plus concret. Donc, nous proposons, si vous le souhaitez, vous l'accordez, pour faciliter la compréhension du paragraphe 10. Donc, si le soutien financier ne devrait pas couvrir le 3e objectif de la Convention, qui, on le sait, a fait l'objet d'un protocole, je l'ai dit, on dirait que ça me hante toujours, le protocole de Nagoya, pour ne pas le citer. Alors, Madame la Présidente, donc on peut rester dans l'esprit du paragraphe 10 de la décision 15/9. Vous savez que notre travail aussi porte également sur le paragraphe là. Donc le paragraphe 10 de la décision 15/9 a donné quand même une orientation sur l'objectif de l'orientation des avantages monétaires et non monétaires, étant donné que le soutien financier, en fait, c'est une jouissance de ces avantages-là, une forme de jouissance de ces avantages-là. Donc pour cela, et dans un esprit de consensus, pour gagner du temps, donc nous faisons une proposition que nous devons vous relire si vous souhaitez. Donc nous gardons ce qui est dit au début. Le financement devrait appuyer la conservation et l'utilisation durable de la biodiversité. Donc notre ajout commence ici en se référant au paragraphe 10 de la décision 15/9 et profiter aux peuples autochtones et communautés locales ainsi que les femmes et les jeunes. Donc ça c'est la tête. Nous proposons un petit A. Le financement devrait soutenir le renforcement des capacités de production d'accès, d'utilisation, d'analyse et de stockage de l'information des canaux numériques. On a ajouté le financement devrait soutenir. Le reste n'a pas changé. En petit B, sur la période 2024-2030, le financement devrait être utilisé pour appuyer la réalisation des objectifs et cibles du cadre mondial. Donc nous supprimons les objectifs de la Convention là-bas, puisque le 3e objectif ne fait pas partie. Donc, je relis le petit B sur la période 2024-2030. Ça, c'est l'ajout. Le financement devrait être utilisé pour appuyer la réalisation des objectifs et cibles du cadre mondial de la biodiversité de Montréal, notamment grâce à la mise en œuvre des activités décrites dans les stratégies et plans d'action nationaux pour la biodiversité. Merci, Madame la coprésidente. Voilà notre proposition.
maybe just if you could come again and just be specific on where you want an addition and what that addition is. I think it was not too clear. What they are.
OK. Voilà. Donc, le financement devrait appuyer la conservation et l'utilisation durable de la biodiversité. Ça, c'est maintenu. Donc, en se référant au paragraphe 10 de la session 15.9, donc j'ajoute et profiter aux peuples autochtones et communautés locales, ainsi que les femmes et les jeunes. Ça, c'est l'ajout.
Yeah, it's clear now. So it's to the benefit of indigenous peoples and local communities and women and youth. Including women and okay. I think that's clear. I'll now move to DRC Congo and then Argentina.
Merci Madame la Présidente pour la parole. Bon, mon intervention c'est à peu près dans le même sens que les Togo, mais il y a peut-être une autre proposition, toujours pour rester dans l'esprit de la décision 15.9. Donc cela veut dire, quand vous voyez les deux phrases, la première phrase, on parle de soutenir la conservation et l'utilisation durable. Au niveau de la deuxième phrase, on reprend encore soutenir les objectifs de la Convention. Donc pour nous, nous avons trouvé que c'est une redondance. C'est pourquoi, au niveau de la première phrase, nous avons proposé plutôt d'enlever la conservation et l'utilisation durable et de maintenir seulement les financements devaient soutenir les renforcements des capacités et d'ajouter les transferts de technologies pour la création et ainsi de suite. Donc c'est ça notre proposition. Donc cela veut dire, au niveau de la première phase, on enlève la conservation et l'utilisation durable, puisque déjà dans la deuxième phase, on parle des objectifs de la Convention. Donc quand on parle des objectifs de la Convention, on sait que c'est la conservation, l'utilisation et le partage des avantages. Donc on reste seulement au niveau de la première phase avec les renforcements des capacités et on ajoute les transferts de technologies. Voilà la proposition que nous avons à ce niveau-là. Merci.
Thank you, DRC. And I think if I got you correctly, you want us to keep the last part, which talks about the supporting of the objectives of the Convention, and you feel that conservation and sustainable use are already reflected by virtue of having that, and that we retain now the part on capacity to generate and then access and the addition of technology, and then so I think that is welcome, and I think it helps to simplify the paragraph. Also, I noted the previous comment by Togo on the reflection of the indigenous peoples and local communities, I think, which is also reflected in paragraph 11. I know we are not yet there, but maybe you might just also consider that it's already something that is addressed in a coming up paragraph, and maybe if you would consider that we leave it in either one of them rather than having it in both paragraphs, I think you may reflect on that. I'll now give the floor to Argentina and then EU. Argentina.
Chair, I present the following text proposal on behalf of GRULAC for the first sentence in paragraph 10. The sentence would read, funding should support conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity and the building of capacity to generate, access, use, analyze, and store DSI in developing countries. This is the text proposal. I would also like to clarify that any possible exceptions we consider that are addressed in the following paragraph. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Argentina. I think we got the proposal to add in developing countries in the first sentence, but we are not sure about the last comment.
I'll talk in the contact groups about some specific reflections, and we're not going into that with this. I think that is covered in the next paragraph. So this does not pertain to that conversation. That was a clarification. Thank you.
I was just getting clarity from my co-chair, so I think I've taken the point. Thank you. I now give the floor to EU and then Japan. EU.
And we have no problem with the addition by Togo on the reference to IPLCs and local communities in all countries. Sorry, that's an addition to the addition. Including women and youth within those communities. I think that's the language that the IFP has suggested to us earlier today. We do have a problem with the proposal that has been made by DRC. I don't think it's proper to remove the primary purpose of the funding from the beginning of paragraph 10. So we would like to retain the reference to funding should support conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. We do not agree with the addition that has been suggested by Argentina. But we have an additional addition, that we want to specify that the support to the building of the capacity to generate, access, use, analyze, and store DSI should be in the perspective of, and that's the language we want to add, to foster conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, as well as to contribute to scientific research on biodiversity. Because I think that's quite important to make the link here, so that we do not disassociate the capacity building on DSI from the main purpose of this. Now, should we wish to pursue the discussion about the beginning of 10 further, I think we would need to think in terms of a reordering of the paragraph in a different way. But to be quite honest, we actually like the order and the composition as such, just with the addition that we have suggested. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, EU, would you come back on the proposed addition and it's supposed to be?
Thank you, certainly. After the, in the second line where it says use, analyze, and store DSI, we would put the, I think that's where the addition of Argentina is, that we would put in brackets, and then to continue to foster conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, as well as to contribute to scientific research on biodiversity. I hope it's clear now.
Very much. It's clear. Thank you. We have got 10 more minutes to conclude, so I'll just take the last parties. If you have text your suggestions, just go straight to the text your suggestions and say where they should be, so that we save time. I'll give the floor to Japan and then Norway. Japan.
We do not see it necessary to add the first sentence actually from funding up to in particular, because funding established under the convention should be used for the objectives of the CBD and the KMGBF, which are of primary importance. We think that the second sentence clearly and sufficiently indicates that In order to make it simple, I think we propose the deletion of the first sentence from funding up to, in particular, because Decision 15/9, paragraph 10 also mentions these objectives. So we think we should align the language with this decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. Indeed, this is in Decision 15/9, and we'll get more views from others. I'll give the floor to Norway and then Cuba.
I had the same concern as the EU to link the generate, access, use, analyze, and store to biological to conservation and sustainable use. So I'm happy with the EU proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Cuba and then United Kingdom.
Presidente, creo que hay varias opciones para simplificar el texto, ¿no? A partir de lenguajes que se han estado utilizando en decisiones anteriores. Pues, por ejemplo, si nosotros, como se explicaba anteriormente, conservación, uso sostenible son objetivos del convenio, y yo creo que en muchos lugares se hace una referencia directa, o sea, no es necesario decir lo mismo en la línea 1 y en la línea 3, cuando ya indicamos que es para realizar, para apoyar los objetivos del convenio, y una segunda línea pudiera ser lo que se refiere al marco global. Ahora, segundo, yo creo que la frase de creación de capacidad hay que ajustarla al concepto con el que se trabaja en convenio. La decisión que se adoptó en la COP 15 dice creación de capacidad y desarrollo, por lo tanto nosotros tenemos que mantener el mismo término, y yo creo que es dentro del párrafo lo que no debe cambiar porque es lo que lo singulariza. O sea, este financiamiento va a estar tan inconcebido para esa larga lista de opciones que tiene: generar, acceder, usar, analizar y el almacenamiento del DCI. Nosotros, por supuesto, apoyamos el planteamiento de Argentina a nombre de GRULAC. Nosotros no podemos aislarnos cuando discutimos financiamiento de lo que acordamos en la meta 19 y el chapó de la meta 19. Por lo tanto, si nosotros aquí decimos que en lugar de países en desarrollo, financiamiento va a pueblos indígenas, comunidades locales, mujeres, nosotros estamos ya preindicando que va a haber una asignación directa a esos grupos de comunidades y personas, y sobre lo cual no hay una decisión. Por eso yo digo que cuando se haga la referencia de quiénes son los beneficiarios, ya el chapó de la meta 19 nos lo dijo, y es lo que estaríamos acogiendo aquí. O sea, no es nada nuevo, ya sobre eso tuvimos una larga conversación. Y el párrafo que viene, el 11, como usted mismo indicó, habla de cuál sería el involucramiento de las comunidades indígenas, de los pueblos indígenas, comunidades locales, en estos procesos de distribución de recursos. Gracias.
Thank you, Cuba. I'll now give the floor to United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I didn't quite catch where the reference to technology transfer was being added by the DRC, but could we please include upon mutually agreed terms directly after the reference to technology transfer? And seeing as I've added 4 words there, I would offer to take 3 out. Very simple, small words. It doesn't change the meaning, but I think it just makes it a bit cleaner. The first reference to the building of the capacity, I think we can just say, and building capacity to generate. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Okay, I'll take the last 3 parties, 1 minute each. Be brief, straight to the point, and then we'll conclude. DRC, Congo, Togo, and Canada, and that's it. DRC, Congo first, and then Togo.
Merci une fois de plus, Madame la Présidente, pour la parole accordée. Alors, nous avons ajouté transfert de technologie, c'est en rapport avec la décision 15-9, c'est ça l'origine. Donc, quand vous lisez la décision, donc c'est pour appuyer cela. Alors, nous devons faire les choix, soit d'utiliser les objectifs de la Convention au niveau de la deuxième phase, soit au niveau de la première phase. On ne peut pas utiliser ça à deux reprises. Quand on dit déjà les objectifs de la Convention, on ne peut pas encore parler de conservation et utilisation durable, puis c'est déjà dit. Donc nous devons faire les choix, soit à la première phase, soit à la deuxième phase. Voilà un peu ce que nous voulons dire. Merci.
DRC Congo, Togo, and then Canada.
Merci, Madame la coprésidente. À notre intervention, Président, nous avons dit que ce paragraphe, en fait, reprend le paragraphe 10 de la décision 15-9. Là-bas seulement qu'on a parlé de l'orientation, comment seront utilisés les avantages monétaires et non monétaires. Et c'était bien clair. Donc nous devons rester cohérents avec les décisions qui ont déjà été consensuellement adoptées à la COP 15. Je pense qu'on doit rester cohérent. Mais ce qui est de nouveau ici, c'est le financement du cadre mondial, les objectifs du cadre mondial et de ses cibles. C'est ça qui est nouveau. Maintenant, comme mon collègue de la RDC le dit, soit nous parlons des objectifs de la Convention, et là nous savons que c'est 3, soit nous nous limitons, comme je l'ai dit, à l'esprit de la décision, du paragraphe 10 de la décision 15-9, qui effectivement n'avait parlé que de la conservation et de l'utilisation durable. Ils n'ont pas fait cas du 3e objectif. Et là, dans ce cas, on peut enlever l'idée, donc je fais la proposition, et en particulier doit être supprimé. On supprime en particulier et on supprime aussi des objectifs de la Convention. Et je pense que le reste, ça peut aller. Merci, Madame la coprésidente.
Thank you, Togo, for the clarification. I'll give the floor now to Canada as our final country to intervene on this paragraph. Solution for everything.
I think that the EU, in its previous intervention, did. I support their proposal also on the wording of IPLCs, and also support the modification by the UK and the addition of mutually agreed terms after technology transfer. Thank you.
Our deliberations on paragraph 9, which we have all agreed to, without any comments. Thank you and congratulations on that. And then paragraph 10, which I think we have included indigenous peoples and women and youth, as was suggested earlier and supported by many parties. And also there is a call to avoid duplication when we talk about the objectives of the convention. I think this is something that can be worked out. And also there is an addition by Argentina on developing countries, which is going to stay in brackets because by GRULAC, not Argentina. Argentina on behalf of GRULAC to include developing countries, which will stay in brackets. And then we have an addition of mutually agreed terms by the UK and also an inclusion of technology in the paragraph. So that's how we are going to continue with that paragraph. We'll try to simplify it as we have been advised to avoid duplication and also be in line with decision 15/9. Thank you very much, and then I think we'll discuss the next steps and come back to you soon.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Colleagues, I'd like to beg your indulgence. I'm going to ask you something very straightforward. If you turn your attention to paragraph 11 very quickly, we're all looking at the clock, don't worry. Turn your attention to paragraph 11. You'll see that we've made a proposal overnight based on some of the very helpful discussions that you had in contact group 2, which was on disbursement. So there's some chapeau text there, if you like, in paragraph 11. It's actually just an operational text, I'm sorry. And there's also a reference to an enclosure. And what we've done overnight is suggest, if you like, a sort of a holding pattern, in a way, in enclosure C. So it's entitled, enclosure C is entitled Initial Formula for Allocation, and it says to be elaborated at the 16th meeting of the COP, taking into account, and then we've listed 2 sort of categories of measures, if you like, 2 categories of metrics. And I just want to invite 5 very quick minutes of reflection on the extent to which you would be happy to forward enclosure C in its current format to COP for consideration, well, for development at the COP. Is enclosure C, 5 minutes, no more, is enclosure C in a format that you would be content to send to COP? And then I'll let you go. I see Japan requesting the floor. Thank you, Japan.
Press the button while Patso was speaking about the previous paragraph, because our suggestion is to put the first sentence in bold, in bracket. I just want to confirm this is clearly understood.
Japan, so is this paragraph 10? Yes? In paragraph 10, so the whole of the first sentence you'd like in square brackets?
Yes, we just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, that is it. Thank you. Next, Canada and then the EU.
On this paragraph and the idea of the enclosure, we would prefer that the COP decision contained guidance for the negotiation of an allocation formula rather than a definitive list of criteria that we saw in enclosure C. So in this way, we would prefer to revert back to the format of the first draft non-paper, where paragraph 11 could contain general guidance, which could include but should not be limited to the criteria outlined in enclosure C.
That's clear. Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. As we've said yesterday, the European Union and its member states actually would favor agreeing a formula at COP16. So in principle, the text in COP16 should look like that, with a reference to a formula. The work that still needs to be done would benefit from capturing a number of the possible criteria that were discussed. And for us, there are 3 criteria that are missing in this one. And it's the level of development, the level of biodiversity under threat, and the consideration of geographical origin. So I think that obviously the 2 basic criteria that are there are good, and we do not object to them. If we have a further discussion, we might want to add something on B, but I think we also would add at least the 3 criteria that I have just now enumerated. If those were added, I think we would have a good basis for further discussion, but I think that I could imagine that others would add as well. So I think it would be good to allow parties to actually add to the list. And I think we need a good basis for decision at COP16. I think in order to operationalize the mechanism and the fund, we actually need decision at COP16 on such a formula. Thank you.
Thank you, EU. So I'm going to take one last party. Let's hear from Australia, please.
I think it's either tiredness or the statistician that I used to be, saying that this is not a formula, these are criteria. And so I think that's really important, a distinction to take into the Conference of Parties, and not imply that this is a formula mathematically we've come up with because we're so spectacular, which we are, but perhaps not for a formula. So I think that's sort of the major issue. And I too, like the European Union, want to see the addition of IPLCs in the criteria. And so I think perhaps building on that list is probably a good idea at this meeting as best we can, just to give the Conference of Parties, things to think about in the formulation of that formula that will come later on, however that sort of gets set out in the rest of the paragraph, sort of establishing the expert group or the RTEG or whoever's going to come up with this formula. So that's, yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Australia. Thank you, everyone. Give us 1 minute to confer. Right, thank you, parties. I've put you through enough in the past few hours, haven't we? Thank you very much. So that's been a very, very fruitful discussion. We've covered a lot of material. As co-chairs, we've discussed, and we are going to establish a contact group. It will be contact group 4, which is going to be on non-monetary benefit sharing. Contact Group 4 will be chaired by Neka Nicholas of Antigua and Barbuda and Salima Campagna of Belgium. Thank you very much, both. That contact group will meet at 7:30 in the EVO building, so the same place as last night. That contact group will discuss, in particular, paragraph 3 of the current text. It will work on the basis of a revised paragraph 3, which we will project onto the screen in the room of the contact group. And it will also consider a number of the suggestions that were made for additional text, including the proposal made by the delegate from Egypt to consider including an additional database under the authority of the convention. If there is time, and if good progress is made in that 4th contact group 2, which is also chaired by Neka Nicholas and Salima Campagna of Belgium, will reconvene directly after contact group 4 for a discussion of paragraph 11 and enclosure C. I hear nervous laughing. I'm sorry, everybody. I see a point of order from Jordan. Jordan, please. The floor.
No, just surprised you want us to stay here until in the early morning. That's your plan, I think.
I don't want you to go home, but we will make it.
Co-chair, I can, if you want, we can write with you a non-paper for tomorrow.
Thank you, Jordan. That's the plan. We'll meet at 7:30. We're not unreasonable. We know you're tired. We know you've worked very hard. Go and get some food. Get some air if you can. We'll meet in the building over the road at 7:30, and we'll present you with a new text on paragraph 3 on the screen. We'll move as quickly as we can, and if we make sufficient progress, we can have another quick exchange about paragraph 12, disbursement and enclosure C. But we won't go crazy. Paragraph 11. All right. So. I hope that's clear. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you, thank you, thank you.